Good afternoon, good evening, everyone. I see a lot of people are joining, so let's just wait another minute and then we get started. All right, good afternoon, everyone. Good evening, depending from where you're joining, or good morning if you're the West Coast. My name is Alessandro Benzer. Today, the second webinar about Fiori authorizations. We had a webinar 2 weeks ago. A lot of you guys were in that webinar already. I received a lot of feedback, very positive feedback, a lot of questions that we were not able to answer in the last session that we want to answer today. Also, I promised to send out the questions. I will do that after today's webinar, so we'll collect them all, and then we send out all the questions with all the answers if there's still something that's not answered as of today. Today with me, I have Jenny Schmieder from our European German business. She's an S/4HANA and Fiori expert. She has done a lot of implementations already. Jenny, maybe you want to say a few words about yourself?
Yes, hi guys, my name is Jenny and I'm an expert in SAP Fiori authorization and S4 authorization, and today I, more in the background, but I keep an eye on your questions and I would like to answer it.
Perfect, thank you so much, Jenny. Yeah, again, my name is Alessandro Benzer. I'm in charge of the US business within Exciting. I'm a senior consultant mainly for GRC, IHE, but then also when it comes to authorizations, S/4HANA migrations, Fiori implementations, and so on. Jenny and I, we are both also education, sub-education trainers and instructors, so we teach ADM courses for SAP. So we have, both of us have broad knowledge about security in general, especially about S/4HANA and Fiori. Just a few words about Exciting for those of you that don't know us yet. We have been founded in 2008 back in Switzerland. We're still headquartered in Switzerland. We have 85 employees worldwide. We have offices in the United States, in Switzerland, Germany, England, and also in Romania and Europe. And like I said, we have a very special relationship with SAP. We're a sub-silver partner, but then we're also an education partner. So most of our senior consultants, or pretty much all of our senior consultants, are also SAP trainers. So if you book an SAP training class, it's very likely you're going to talk to one of us, delivering the SAP training. And then certainly we have recognized expertise. We have partner statuses in different areas, for GRC, security, and so on. For today's webinar, a lot of you, like I said, already joined 2 weeks ago, where we had more like an overview, kind of like starting to dive into the topic. Today we want to go more into detail. We want to go into the system and do more demos and show you, how we can activate content, how we can build authorizations, how do we build catalogs, how we do build groups, how do we authorize those in PFCG, and then also if there's an issue, and so how can we find issues. We will not go into too much details about the authorization debugging today. I just want to show you guys what tools are available. We have a dedicated session in 2021 in January, where we will really go into authorization debugging for Fiori, how we can find issues, because there's so many tools available, and not always when there's an issue it's an authorization issue. So I just want to make sure today we understand, and then we have a separate deep dive if you're really specifically interested in authorization debugging. But today, like I said, I want to go into more details than last time. So it's going to be a lot of content again. We might have a couple of minutes at the end for questions. Jenny will keep an eye on the questions. If you have any questions, just type them into the question box, and we try to answer them throughout the webinar. I will go ahead and switch off my camera so you have the full screen while I talk. So when I share my screen, I think it makes sense to have my camera off so you have the full screen here, but it's still going to be me talking. All right. We ended last time, for those of you that were part of the last webinar, with the challenges we have, and that's what I want to start today. So when we implement Fiori, very often what happens is we call it a Fiorization. That means they were trying to implement entire business processes into Fiori, because we want to avoid that a user has certain applications in Fiori, but then still has to use the SAP GUI to complete a transaction, for example. So when we implement Fiori for business users, it doesn't have to be for all of them, can just be a subset of your users that we implement Fiori. We probably want to enable the entire business process in Fiori. Whether the app is a UI5 app, a Fiori app, or whether it's just the ABAP application that's enabled for like a HTML format, basically, it doesn't matter. But at the end of the day, we want to have the user be able to complete the entire business process in Fiori, and that's a big challenge, because we have then to bring all the transactions we have into Fiori. That means transaction codes that don't have a replacement on an app in Fiori, we have to build. And then also we have to implement all the true Fiori applications. There are different types of applications we'll be talking about later as well. When it comes to how do we start, where do we start? We talked about the Fiori apps library last time, where we have like basically a central point of information about the apps. There's a recommendation application within that Fiori apps library as well, where we can find apps that replace legacy transactions. So if I have a transaction like, for example, FI01 to create banks, and I want to replace that with Fiori, I can search for example, the transaction code FI01, and then it shows me what apps are available in Fiori that replace or offer the same capabilities as that transaction. And to find those, it's kind of like a manual approach, and then we have to go back to the rows and build that. So there's a lot of steps that are required and a lot of effort to build those authorizations. That's a big challenge. I'm going to talk about that today, how we can help you, what are standard tools, and then also in a following session, what are automation tools that are available to make your life easier. One of the biggest challenges as well, because we are all from an ABAP background, we're ABAP security experts, and we know PFCG very well and all those tools. And now we have to build catalogs and groups, and we cannot build them in PFCG because they're new applications, different applications. So we have to create them. It's a new concept. All that creates a big challenge for us, and that's what we want to talk about today. And then, like I mentioned already, the authorization debugging, or when we have issues, there's certain issues that can occur, that will occur. It's not always a true authorization issue. Sometimes there's different root cause for the issue, and there's certain things we have to know how we can find those. So a lot of things that we have to understand in order to implement Fiori and run Fiori. Today, we want to talk about, like we finished with that slide last 2 weeks ago, where basically what needs to be done, like the creation, all that stuff. So today we want to show you what is possible in SAP Standard. So we'll just be talking about SAP Standard in our next webinar in 2021. We'll also talk about our XMS solution, where we can automate and must maintain a lot of those things that are, in SAP Standard we have to do manually. So there's a lot, it's not better or worse. It's just with SAP Standard tools, it's more a manual approach, or, we have to do one by a time. And then with XMS, we can must maintain and must change a lot of things that in SAP Standard, unfortunately, is not possible to do in an automated fashion. So today we're going to focus on SAP Standard. Again, last week, just briefly again, to understand from a Launchpad perspective. So if a user logs on to Fiori, lands on the Fiori Launchpad, on the homepage basically, where we can see the groups that the user is authorized to, different applications that are called tiles or cards. SAP changed the name here recently, changing back and forth, to be very honest. So these are applications that are authorized through a catalog in the background, but then displayed on the front page through so-called groups. So I can have different catalogs that give me the authorizations, and then with a Fiori group, I can show those applications in the user's homepage. There is that app finder where I can go back and find all the transactions or the applications that I'm authorized to. So basically all the catalogs that are assigned to my user, all the apps that come from those catalogs, I can find as well. Even though they might not show up as an application here through a group, I can still find them if I'm authorized. So we'll talk about that as well. But it's important to understand the authorizations always come from a catalog, and then the group really is just for grouping purposes to show the applications on the Launchpad. Also shown here, So we can have a catalog, like here, for example, called Sales Manager, that has 6 applications in it. And then we build 2 different groups. One group is for reporting, so we put the reporting applications in there. Another group is called Internal Sales, where we put internal sales applications in there. And then basically, in order for the user to access those cards in a group, the user needs to have the catalog that contains those apps. If I authorize a user that Sales Manager catalog, he will get access to all 6 applications, even though on the homepage, on the Launchpad, the user might only be seeing 4 out of the 6 because we're only showing 4 through the groups. It's also possible that we have applications from multiple catalogs, so that's possible. It's not recommended. We don't recommend to do that, but it could also be that card 1 comes from catalog 1 and card 2 comes from catalog 2. That's possible as well. Again, we don't necessarily recommend that. We want to have a true group catalog relationship, but that's possible as well. But ultimately, what matters is basically the applications, the authorizations to the applications, they come from the catalog and not from the group. The group is just really there for grouping purposes, and the user will still be able, in this example here, to access card 5 and 6 through the App Finder. From an authorization perspective, we talked about that last time, different deployment scenarios with the embedded, where we have front and back end on the same system. Here I'm showing a central hub deployment where we have basically a separate front end server and a separate back end server. It could be that we have one front end server and then multiple backends, whatever the case might be. I'm just showing that here because at the end of the day, it doesn't matter whether you have an embedded or a central hub. I mean, it matters, but from an authorization perspective, we have to deal with the front end authorizations and we have to deal with the backend authorization. And if we look at in the aspect of a central hub where we have 2 different systems, we will basically build a front end role, a front end authorization role on the front end server, and also a PSCG role on the backend that contains the backend authorizations. If I have an embedded scenario, then I can just put everything into the same role because it's the same system. But from a thinking perspective, we have to understand that there's front-end authorizations and back-end authorizations. We will be talking about the groups and catalogs, how we build them. So I will be showing you the content manager and the Fiori Launchpad designer, how we can utilize SAP standards, SAP standard catalogs, and then build custom ones, reference existing applications into your custom ones, and so on. So we'll be talking about the cards and the target mapping when we go into the content manager and the Launchpad designer, what that really means. But basically, every application can be taken and added to a catalog, and then we can authorize that catalog to an end user. The communication, we talked about that last time as well. Communication happens through the OData service. So there's an OData service on the front end. There's an OData service on the back end. They have a different type. So when we add them, for example, in PFCG, there's 2 different types. It's the IWSG and the IWSV. The G is the front end and the V is the back end. I just remember it, that's the gateway. That's why it's IWSG, G for gateway. And I remember in my mind that that's the front end authorization if you have a hard time remembering those. But we'll get back to it in just a second. So what do we have to do when you start with Fiori? And you're starting on a greenfield basically. So what's the approach to basically implement or enable Fiori? The first starting point is always that Fiori apps library, where we can basically go in and find all the apps that are available. We have installation information, we have configuration information, how the app has to be installed, what are the requirements, but then also how can we configure and authorize it. From the Fiori apps library, we can, the Fiori apps that gives us a lot of information. There's, for example, the catalogs and pre-delivered catalogs and business roles that we can use. And that information we can then reuse and repurpose in that rapid activation. So there's a rapid activation transaction called STC01. We'll just see a screenshot in a second here, where we can then go ahead and say, okay, for certain apps, I know they come through certain business roles. I want to enable those business roles. I want to activate all the content that is required for those business roles. And for that, I can use that rapid activation. So to basically activate all the applications so I can run them. Once that's activated, we can then basically go ahead and start creating our own catalogs and groups. Certainly, if you just want to play around in a sandbox, then you can just use the SAP standard catalogs. You don't have to create your custom ones. If you just want to play around in a sandbox to see the to test out the functionality, that's entirely possible. But when it comes to implementing in your productive landscape, basically, then we want to it's recommended to build your custom groups, your custom catalogs, following naming conventions, following a security concept, and build your own. Similar as we do with PFCG roles, with transaction codes. There's the SAP standard roles, but it's never recommended to use those in production. So we always build our own roles, whether it's a copy from the SAP standard or whether we build it from scratch, it doesn't matter. But at the end of the day, we're going to assign and authorize our users with our own roles and not using SAP standard roles. That's always the recommendation. And that's similar with the catalogs and the groups that we want to, we can repurpose what SAP delivers, but at the end of the day, we want to build our own. Once we have the catalogs and the groups built, that goes fairly quickly. We'll see that here in just a second. So that's can be done in a short time. Then we still have to authorize those applications, through PFCG roles. So basically, we have to bring those catalogs and groups into the role menu. Again, if we have a central hub deployment, then we have to deal with the front-end authorization, the back-end authorization in different roles. If it's on one system in an embedded scenario, like I'm just demoing, it will be an embedded scenario. Then we just have to build one role and put the front-end and the back-end authorizations in there. But that has to be done. And then also, it's not just those services that need to be authorized. On the back-end, for the back-end authorizations, where you have those OData services that are being consumed by the application, for those, we still have to deal with all the business authorizations. So if you have an application for material master, we still have to deal with mmatimat, for example, or all the material master authorization objects that we know from MM01, for example. So it's still very, very often the same authorization objects are very similar ones. Some of them might be new, but mostly it's the same authorization objects that we still have to deal with. In the context of Fiori, it will be in the context of the Fiori application. And when it comes to the traditional transactions, it will be in the context of the transaction code. But it's the same approach basically. So what does that mean? Today for the demo, I just have 2-3 slides, and then we jump into system to show you so you can see how it looks like. I will be on a GRC system, so I have a GRC system. I'm not showing an S/4HANA system because our S/4HANA system is a little bit slow and it takes a long time. Where we don't have the power, our machines don't have the power to really show a good demo. So I just go into a GRC system, but it doesn't necessarily matter because Fiori is Fiori. We can activate Fiori for ECC, we can have Fiori on S/4HANA, we can have Fiori on CRM, we can have Fiori for access control GRC, so it doesn't really matter. In my example here, the backend is just a GRC system and not an ECC or an S4. But the approach will be the same if you're an S4, if you're an ECC, or any other backend and frontend. It will always be the same approach. What I will start is I will go and I found an app that I want to authorize. I don't want to go through that app recommendation and do the finding. I know a couple of apps I want to authorize. One of those is called Access Approver. Basically, when I get an approval workflow and I have an approval due, there's an app in Fiori where I can do those approvals. So I can basically an approval app. It's a true UI5 app, specifically built for Fiori. What I can see there, so if I open it up in the Fiori apps library and I have the link posted here, I have 2 sections that are very interesting for me as a security person. The one is the installation section, and that's basically on the bottom left here. What it shows me is what are the requirements for that app to work or to be that's even available. So basically on the front end, I need a front end component. It's also referred to as a product UI. And that's basically the component that I can see here is that UI GRAC01. With for that particular app I'm looking at that comes with support package 4. So that's the product UI that has to be installed on the front-end server. So if I have an embedded, will be on that system. If I have a central hub, that's the product UI or a component that needs to be installed on the front-end server. But then also for that app to work, I need a backend component. So there's a backend system because Fiori connects to a backend. that needs to be installed or needs to be available on the backend. Again, here we're talking about access control GRC, and what I now need for that app to work is basically the GRC Foundation a 12.0 version with support package 9. So that's basically the minimum requirement for the app to work, and that's something Basis has to install. So if you find an app and it's not available in your system, it's very likely that, and that's probably the root cause, that either the front-end component or the back-end component is not installed. So that's a must. That's something that you have to do. And then the second, and that's usually when we as a security person take over, because that's a Basis. I mean, I'm not installing components. The configuration information is basically where I can start my work. So I see here technical configuration, where I can see the technical catalog. Remember from the last webinar, I always said if we create own catalogs, if we do a customization, we build our own custom catalogs, then we always want to take the reference from the technical catalog. That's important. There's a technical catalog, and then sometimes there's also a business catalog. That's a little bit different. We always want a reference from the technical catalog, because every application comes in one technical catalog. It doesn't necessarily have to have a business catalog. Even though technically it wouldn't matter, but we always, as a best practice and as a recommendation, we always want to use the technical catalog. So that's what we want to repurpose. What's also important are the target mappings. We talked briefly about that last time. So an app can have different target mappings. Like for example, here we have a semantic object that's called access request, and the semantic action is approve. Certain apps have different target mappings where, I might have access request. Let's say we have display and we have approve. Depending on how the app is configured, it might just be for a display and I don't have the approve button. Depending on the action. I mean, here that app is for approver. That's why there's only one target mapping, but there's applications that do different things, or we can do different things. Then that target mapping is important, whether it's an approve or display or a create. That's something that can be controlled with the semantic action. And then also important is that business role, because that business role we can reuse when we do the content activation. Because for that app to work, there must be certain all data services must be generated, hash values have to be generated, the SICF service has to be activated, and so on. And that stuff needs to exist, needs to be there. And for that we can repurpose that business role. So if we copy and paste that business role and we go into the rapid activation content, that's my next slide, we can repurpose that. Before we go there, rapid activation, basically there are two task lists. For those of you that don't know rapid activations, basically there's different task lists that I can activate configuration in the system. For Fiori, there are two different task lists. The first one is Fiori Foundations. It's basically a one-time thing that has to be executed once, that brings all the basic configuration for the Launchpad, for the SAP GUI, HTML, and so on. Activates different services that needs to be activated, just so that the Launchpad runs, and so on. And we can also generate user roles for end users and admins. That's possible through that Fiori Foundation S4, specifically for S4 here. That's one thing we activate once. That's a one-time thing. We do that just one time. Then the second one, that's one that we use more often. That's basically where we can do content activation. That's what I just said. What we can do here is basically we can define the scope based on business roles. So we can go in there, execute that task list, then define the scope. And for that scope, I can enter or type in that business role I want to activate. And if I go back one slide, that's basically the business role we're showing here from that Fiori apps library. That's the business role I can type in to activate the content for all the applications that are in that business role. So it's not recommended to activate all the content. It's really just recommended to just activate what you need based on those business roles. And that's why I try to make the link from the apps library to the Fiori content activation based on those business roles. And what that basically does, it activates all the Fiori apps. So it activates the ICF node, it generates the OData service, generates the hash values, and all that stuff. And really the beauty of that, and that's just a slide here from SAP. You know, what we basically try to do is having, you know, a rapid deployment, so that, you know, if and that's especially needful or helpful if we do like a sandbox, you want to try out functionality, if you want to test, then the rapid activation is a great starting point, because it really, you know, it gets you out of the gate in no time, and you can activate, and then you can, you know, authorize, for example, the standard rows and the standard catalogs that come from SAP, and just start play around with the application. So it's really a great thing to, you know, really get out of the gate very quickly. But then also when it comes into deploying Fiori in your productive landscape, so where you start in dev and then move it up to production, even there we can use the content activation. Again, be very careful, don't just activate everything, because there's a lot of things we're opening up. So we want to be very specific. That's why, you know, the scope can be defined based on the business roles. And again, the recommendation really is from SAP to just activate the business role that we need. Then when we have the content activated, and I'm not going to show you how that works, ST01, because that's also very often a basis task. Basis executes that. It's very well documented. If you want to learn more about that, you can find it online, or basis, you know, when they install the system, that's usually what they execute. Really, then I want to go and get into how do we authorize, how do we build catalogs, groups, and how do we authorize them. I think that's why we're here. That's what I want to show you. So there's two main applications that we use when it comes to building catalogs and groups. The first application is the content manager. The content manager is basically that application that allows me to create catalogs, to change and do things with catalogs. I cannot create and change groups. It's really just for the catalogs. Similar functionalities or the same function is also available in the Launchpad Designer. But Launchpad Designer, as far as I understand from SAP, over time they want to replace that with the content manager and the app manager and different tools. So the content manager really has the same functionality as we have in the Launchpad Designer, but also much more. So there's a lot of things that were only developed and introduced in the content manager. That's why it's a great tool to use. What's great about the content manager is basically we can create our own catalogs. You know, we can create them from scratch. We can use existing content to reference to, and I'll get back to that in just a second what that means. So we can basically reference existing tiles from an existing technical catalog that SAP sends into our custom one. There's certain mass operations that we can do in here. They're limited, but there's certain mass operations that are possible. And what's also very helpful, we cannot really see it here, but we'll see it in the system in just a second. We can also check the underlying services for a catalog. So let's say I have a catalog, I've built that, I added a couple of applications, and there might be some services which are not activated, which I don't know, because, you know, how do I know? And if I would just authorize it and build it, and then it would go into the Fiori Launchpad and I would run it, I would get an error message. I don't know what's going on. So we can avoid a lot of those situations already with the content manager, for example, to check the services, the underlying services, if they're activated, if they exist, you know, if the foundation's there, that we can run the app. From that perspective, the content manager is a great tool to do that. And then the second, and I just have 2 slides, and then we jump into the system. And the second application I want to show you is the Launchpad Designer. Launchpad Designer has been around for a while, ever since Fiori came out, basically. Some of you might know it already. In the Launchpad Designer, we can create catalogs, we can create groups, so we can basically do both, but we have certain limitations that I just pointed out for the content manager that are not available in the Launchpad Designer. That's important. Once we build a catalog in the content manager, we still have to go to the Launchpad Designer to build a group. That's not possible in the content manager as of today. With that, let's jump into the system. I'm going to show you. I hope I'm not too fast, but we have the session recorded. So if you miss something, you can always, we will send out the recording tomorrow. Just takes a night to generate, but then tomorrow you will have the email and you can, rewatch and go back if it was too quick. So basically what we want to do is we want to start creating an own catalog, a custom catalog. What I do is I go into the content manager. I have the transaction code in the slides, but here as well, that's the transaction code. So I just go into the content manager, and then basically what I can see here is all the available catalogs in my system. So I can see here, again, I'm in a GRC system. It's not an S4HANA system, but it doesn't matter. It will look the exact same if you're on S4HANA. Here I have different catalogs. We can see that there's 35 to be exact, different ones. Some are, and this is really just for GRC. What I always do is there's that search button. So let's say I want to search for something. I can just do that here very quickly. Again, when we create a catalog, we can always reference, or we want to reference back to the technical catalog. That's what we have in the Fiori apps library. So if I could just quickly jump to my browser and we go into that access approver, that's the first one. We want to authorize. There's in the implementation information, we have installation and configuration. There's a couple of others, but those are the ones that are important. And in the configuration section, I can see here that technical catalog. That's basically the technical catalog. I can copy and paste, go back to my SAP GUI, and then here I can search for it, and I will see, that catalog with the applications that are in that catalog. So we have that access approver. That's the one I just searched for. But then in the catalog, there's also other applications, that are also in there. But I'm really interested in that access approver. Searching here, we can use that, or if you just want to search for manager, you just type manager, hit enter or the go button. You can also search for them, the ones that are available. That's entirely possible. We can, in here, we can copy a catalog. That's not, we don't recommend that, so that the copy button is here. But what happens basically, if we copy that catalog, it will copy the entire catalog, and it will be an individual instance of a new catalog. And then the tiles that are in there are not referenced back to my technical catalog. And I want to have that, and I'll show you how we do that. So what we want to do here is always, we want to always create a new catalog, individual instance. And what we basically have to do here, we have to give it a technical name, that's the ID, and then a title. So I follow here my naming convention, whatever my naming convention is. We usually want to follow similar naming conventions as we have for our roles. And I just call it the GROC manager. I give it a title that's called like GRC manager. You see, I did it already before. So I give it a title, whatever that is. That's basically just to to refine and find and group them. And usually when it comes to the catalogs, we follow a function approach. That's our best practice recommendation, like building a functional catalog, similar as we would build functional roles in PFCG. So now what I did is I created a catalog. It's created an ID, a title. We see there's no content, there's no applications just yet, and we now want to add those. There's different ways to do it. How I do it is basically I switch the view here from catalogs to tiles and target mapping, and then I go and search for those tiles and applications that I wanna add to my catalog. To search here, I have to kind of know how they're called, or I just search for like access approver because that's the name of the application I wanna authorize, or I wanna add to my catalog. If I just search for that, I can see there's that application. It's called access request, the semantic object with the semantic action approve. You might have different, or if you search for an app, I mean, this comes from the title now. If you search and there's multiple ones, then again, you can always go back to the apps library. You can see what there are. I mean, here it's just the one. If there's multiple, then you would have multiple here, and you would have to, pick the one that you want to use. So this is basically the target mapping that's there from the technical catalog. And now what I can do is I select the one I want, like that one here, and then I say add reference to a catalog. So basically I select, I hit the button, and then I select that catalog that I want to add it to. So I just search for the one I created. That's my manager. I select, and then I say add the tile, the application, and also the target mapping. The TM stands for target mapping. And I add that as a reference. I could also just do the tile or just the target mapping, but in order for that application to work, I need the tile and the target mapping, and that's basically what I do. So I hit here, and then a second later down here I will get a confirmation that it has been added. So just let it add here for a second. And now we can see one tile and one target mapping added to catalog, my custom grok manager catalog that I created. Why do I want to use a reference? So if I don't, I can create that from scratch. I can give the title, the object, the action. I can all do that by myself and type it in manually if I want to. I purposely use reference because first of all, I'm lazy. I don't want to type it in if it's there. But more importantly is, let's say SAP in the next support package, next release, next support package, there's a change to that app and something changes from a configuration perspective. If I have a reference back to the technical catalog, what I was basically just doing, if SAP updates that configuration, it will automatically be updated in my in the tile that's referenced in my custom catalog. So I don't have to deal with going forward with an upgrade. I don't have to deal with those configurations because it will automatically be updated because I'm referencing back to that technical catalog. And that's why we want to use the reference. We don't want to create it from scratch, because if I create it from scratch, then I would have to go in manually and make the update. But I don't know what needs an update. So I don't have that information. So it's really recommended to always use the reference. That's why we do that. So now what we have done, basically we created a catalog. We added one application, one tile with one target mapping. And that catalog we could now already authorize to a user. But in order for the user and that app to show up in the Launchpad, we also have to add it to a group. I can now just go to the Launchpad designer with through a transaction, or I can also click here, open in designer, and then it will open that catalog I have selected here, or it will open basically the Launchpad designer. That's now a web application, a little bit slower, but you will see it here in a second. And then we're in the Launchpad designer, where we can maintain and build and do certain things with the catalogs, but we can also then do and build, or go ahead and build groups. Here, if you're on Fiori 2.0, it's a little bit better on 3.0. You might be a little bit confused with the how that looks here. The catalogs kind of is gray, and then the groups is white, and it kind of looks like we're in groups, but actually we're in catalogs. So that's you will be confused 100%. Right now we're in catalogs. If I switch to the groups, then groups gets gray. So that's always a little bit tricky in the beginning, because now when you just look, you think like I'm in catalogs, but no, actually you're in groups. Just I wanted to point out that, because that's always something that people get confused. But now I'm in catalogs, and here we can basically see the catalog I created with that one app. That one app has, you can see it here, that one app has one target mapping behind it as well. So object, action, and then basically the target mapping to the application that's there, and that's referenced. So again, if SAP changes, it will update my configuration here as well. Now what I want to do is I want to build a group. So I go to group here, and then I stay down here on the bottom left, I say plus, create group. A group, again, has a title and an ID. Here it's just flipped, basically. So first the title, we call it GRC manager. The ID, I just go same naming convention as the technical, as the group, as the catalog. So I just follow here the same. One thing with groups basically is what we have to think about is that group personalization. And I want to point that out here. We can allow personalization of groups, which means we can define what apps are in that group, but the user, if personalization is enabled, they can for themselves take apps out or add other apps to that group. So they can basically change how the groups are displayed, and they're just doing that for themselves. So if they first log in, it will be the way we designed them. But if personalization is enabled, they can change that. And I leave that active here because I want to show you in just a bit what that basically means. So I create a group, again, title, technical name, it's empty. I then can add tiles or links. So here I'm just trying to add a tile, the one from my catalog. So I basically say add tile. And then here, right now it's just giving me the first group, the first catalog that it found. So I just go here and then search the catalog I wanna use. So I built that GRC manager catalog. So I just search for it, click on it, and then basically I can see from my GRC manager, there's one app, one tile added. And if I want to add that now to my group, I just say plus, and then it will say tile added successfully. So now if I go back, my group has one tile. So that's basically it. So now we created a catalog, a custom catalog. We added one app, and we also created one custom group with that one tile here, just to keep it simple, just one tile. We're going to add one in just a little bit to show you why, but right now it's only one. So let's go ahead and authorize that, because at the end of the day, we still have to authorize those groups. So they're not enabled yet, and we cannot assign them to a user yet. So how do we do that? So role administration is still in PFCG. We want to make use of the authorization proposals from transaction SU24, because we can, or the applications basically, those applications, they come with authorization proposals like our transactions do. So from that perspective, it's very important that we add the catalog and the group to the role menu, because only then SU24 will bring in the authorization proposals. Otherwise, we would do that manually. We would lose reference, all the things that we know, the great things we have from SU24. So this is now what we have to do. We have to go into PFCG, build a role, add the catalog and the group to the menu. The menu, that if we do that and we save it, the menu basically will then bring in, so SU24 will bring in the authorization values into the authorization profile. We have to generate that, and then we can assign the role to a user. So let's see how that looks like. So we go back to the SAP GUI. I go to transaction PFCG. I have a role here. I already created one. It's an empty role. I called it Fiori Demo Access Approver. I go in here in edit mode. We can see it's an empty role. It's already assigned to my user. Then, like I said, we have to go to the menu, and then similar as we do with transactions, we have to now add the catalog and the group. And this is now a Fiori catalog and a group. So let's start with the catalog. Depending on what I'm building, if I do an embedded scenario or a central hub where I have a different front end, I can here select whether it's a local front end or a remote front end server. That's something depending on your scenario. I'm here in an embedded scenario, so it's local. And then I just go ahead and search for that catalog. So I can just either type it in if I know, or I hit the search button, and then I can see here all the catalogs I created. The one that I want here is my C Grok Manager. Select that one. If I want to display it, I can hit display. It will open it in the Launchpad Designer where I just was. But actually what I do, I just select it here, hit OK. And now we can see that catalog has been added to my role menu. What it does, because I added to the role menu, it brings in the front end and the backend service that's required. Here, the system knows it's an embedded scenario, so it brings the front end and the backend. Again, if you have if you have a central hub, then the backend would have the IWSV and the front end would have the IWSG. That's, the system knows how the configuration looks like, and we'll just bring in the ones that are available. This is the catalog. So now what we also want to add is the group. We go here again, go into tile group. Again, if you want to search like for C star, and then we hit F4 or the match code, we can just search them. Let's see where it is. It's all the way at the bottom here. We select it. Again, if you want to display the group, you can. We just saw it. So we hit OK, edit. So we have now the group and the catalog. If we hit save, that's saved. And now we have to still go into the authorizations. And the authorizations are important because of the backend, and not just for a backend, but the one thing is the front-end authorizations, which are very straightforward. It's the IWSG basically, but then the backend also needs the authorization. So from a authorization perspective, there will be more work that needs to be done in the backend than on the front end. So I just use the expert mode to read out merge new to bring in the proposals from SU24. This app doesn't have a whole lot, but we can basically see there's a couple of authorizations that come in, and that's a lot of them for GRC purposes. I have them all properly maintained, or they were already here actually. So we just hit generate. So that still needs to be done. And now let me just compare the user very quickly so we can try. Yep. And so basically what I now have is I have a test user that we can use to log on. So let's just see how that looks from my end user perspective, because that role that I now built is assigned to my test user. So I switch the mode here. That's my test user. I start the Fiori Launchpad That's again, like last time I mentioned, we build a base role that gives all those basic authorizations, like they can start the Launchpad, certain things like a base role. That's the one I shared last time. And now we assign just a second role, which is that GRC manager. And we can basically directly see that here on the front page. We have one group that's called GRC manager, and there's that one app that we added. And here, I can execute the app if everything is activated and properly configured, which in my case here it is. The app will start. I don't have any approvals due. That's why there's no requests found. But looks like the app is working. When I go to the app manager, or basically the app finder, sorry, hit the app finder, I can also see here basically that's my catalogs. Now difficult to understand or differentiate because I named it a similar group and catalog same name. But basically here I can see that the catalog GRC manager has one app, and that's also added to the one group, which is my GRC manager. So now what happens a lot when we have Fiori project, or like in every situation, requirements change. So now we have to add a second app. The user needs another app or whatever, and we have to update that role. That happens. So where do we go? So let's say we have to add a second app to that for that user, for that function. So we have to go back to the catalog, because we first have to add an app to the catalog. So I go back to the content manager. I still have that catalog. I know it's that GRC manager I built, and I want to add a second application that's called access request. So we had the access approver. Now I search for access request. I know that from the Fiori apps library. I know what I need. And basically here, that very first app, I also want to authorize that to the same catalog. So I do the same. I search it, and then I select it. I say add reference to catalog. Same as before. I could have done that the first time, but I did it on purpose, and I'll show you in a second why. So I search my catalog again. This is the GRC manager. I say again add tile and the target mapping as a reference. Hit here OK. It's now added. We can see one tile and one target mapping added to the catalog. All good. And I decide I'm not going to add it to the group, because I don't want to add it in the group. If the user wants to use that, then he can find it through the app manager. So because of time now, I just skip one step. So if I would go now to the Launchpad and I would refresh, or actually I can do that very quickly. I just hit refresh here. The user will already be able to see the app, because not in the group, but through the catalog, because he has the catalog authorized. But what's the problem? And that didn't work, so I have to restart the Launchpad. Let me just do that very quickly. The catalog now carries that app because we added it. And we can see, if we go to the app finder, we can now see that GRC manager has that second app, but we didn't authorize it yet. So if I start it, the user, and he might have the authorization because of the other role, but the user will get an authorization error. So it cannot start the app. Okay, that's because we didn't update the role, and we have to update that role. So let me go back to PFCG to show you. That's the app. Sorry, that's the role that contains the catalog. And if we go into change mode, in the menu, we can see our catalog that's here, and we can see the only apps, or basically the only OData services that are here, are from that very first app that we added, which is the access request, the access approver app, but not the access request search app. So now I have to add that authorization here because it's missing. The user gets an error message. It's not working. So if I update the catalog, I also have to update my role. And that's possible. We select the catalog, and then we hit that details button. Don't ask me why that's called details, but we hit that details button. And what then basically happens is it will refresh that role menu. And we can see here, a little unfortunate, but if I scroll to the right, we can see a comparison from what is the current situation, what will be when we do that merge. Basically, two objects will be newly introduced. 2 were already there, and those 2 new ones are the first 2 is basically that new app that we added to the catalog. So I have to do that. So I have to go back in here and add those. And so if that's that details button. Again, don't ask me why it's called details, but that's really the update button for the catalog, because now we can see the 4 services are authorized here. We hit save, and since we changed the menu, we also have to deal with the authorization. So we have to go back into the authorizations, use the expert mode to do that read all merge new, read new information from SC24 because there's new services in there. And it will bring in my case here, I have already everything maintained in SC24, just for demo purposes, it makes it easier. I have to regenerate, and now the user can try again. So let me close that. We go back in, just start it again. We remember I didn't add it to the group, so it doesn't show up in the user in that group here for the user. So the user has to go through the app finder, go to that catalog, and then here he can see the app. So if I click on the app now, because now I have it authorized, now we can see it starting before it went into an error. Now we can see here it loads data from that app. This is now just a GRC app, nothing sophisticated here. But now that app works. So important, whenever you update a catalog and you bring in new applications and you change, you also have to update your PFCG roles. That's very important. The last thing I want to show you here in the system is basically that app finder. So like I said, the user has one catalog. In the group, there's only the one app, but that group, we allowed personalization. What does that basically mean? Here, that icon where we can basically add or remove a tile, I can click here and say, okay, add that application to my GRC manager group. And now if I do that and I go back to my home screen, I can now see it's now added to that GRC manager group. And because it's a personalization that I enabled, it's only for me. So if I assign that the same role to you, you will only be able to see the access approver on the launch on the home screen. And you would have to go like yourself, like I just did, to the app finder, find the app, add it to that group, and then it would show up here. That's important. That's a personalization. And that's always a question whether you want to have that enabled or not. You think, oh, that's great. But the other problem is also that users, let's say they need the access approver. For whatever reason, they clicked on, oops, I clicked on the app itself. I wanted to click on that here. It could also be that they remove it here and then they call support desk and say, oh, I don't have access to access approver anymore. I lost it. You did something wrong. It's not. It's because it's a personalization. So that's always something to consider. Also, there was one of the questions from the last webinar, if we can have like favorites, like in the SAP GUI, we can add applications to my home. That's kind of like my favorites. And then if I go back, basically I have here my home section. That's just for myself. And I can also add, applications as into my home, which is basically my favorites. So that's basically that personalization that we can do in Fiori. And that's important to understand. Again, it's important that when we do a change to a catalog, that we go back to PFCG, update the role profile, bring in those new or those changed objects. Maybe something goes out because we removed an application, and we also want to have the application gone from an authorization perspective. But very often it's because we add something and it doesn't show up, or the user cannot execute it. It's because we didn't update the PFCG role, because we have to update the menu through that details button, because only then S24 will bring in the new authorizations that are required for that application. And that's why we have to do that. There are I showed a lot of tools, and we only have like 5-6 minutes left. It's always an hour goes quick because it's a very exciting topic to talk about, and I always like to show a lot of things, and I would love to show more, but we only have an hour. There's a lot of tools and transactions tables available to do configuration. I mentioned last time there's new things coming out with S/4HANA 2020. That's called pages and spaces, where basically we're replacing the groups with spaces and pages to get better or easier use for the end users, or get a better view for them. We'll talk about that more in details next time. because it's still a similar approach. It's just we do it a little bit differently, but from an authorization perspective, you still have to authorize it very similarly to what we've done with the groups. So there's a lot of tools and transactions available also when it comes to debugging, authorization, failures, and so on. There's one good transaction that I wanted to share is that SUI support. It's basically a support transaction where we have like it's like an index or a cockpit where we can basically jump out to a lot of transactions and tables and configuration options for all the UI technology, and that's mainly for Fiori. So if you go to that SUI support, there's for the Fiori Launchpad, there's the app manager, the content manager, the Launchpad designer, and so on. Then also basis transactions like PFCG, SUIM, gateway log, and so on. So different applications are basically consolidated into that support transaction. So a very good one to remember. Like I said initially, when it comes to Fiori and debugging issues, whether it's authorization issues or just issues because the tile doesn't work, that can have different reasons. Like I was just showing, it could be that there's missing applications in the Launchpad. It could be because we didn't add the tile to a group, or personalization is allowed, users took it away. There's not an authorization problem, it's just not there. It could be that certainly that missing authorizations can always be a problem. It can be that SICF nodes are not active, services are inactive, not generated. And so there's a lot of different reasons why certain things cannot work. That's why I said initially also with the content manager, for example, that second point here, the inactive services and inactive SICF nodes, that can be checked in the content manager. When we hit that check service button, it will check if all the underlying services are active or if they exist and are active. That can be something that we can check with the content manager. To find errors, there's different tools. There is classical authorization trace, whether it's ST01 or STAuth trace, or if you use ST53 even, could give you authorization issues. Not everything is an authorization issue. It could be that there's, like I said, services which are not active. Could be that you're missing trusted RFC authorizations through SRFC ACL. That's something you can, for example, see in the gateway error log. So those are the transaction codes here for the front end and the back end, where you can basically look into the gateway error log and find errors. It can be that you have to go into the system log, find something in the system log, or it might be a dump because something dumps, because something not active, different reasons. Application log is a good one. HTTP trace, if you trace that. Or one thing that Jenny also uses a lot in projects is the developer tools in the browsers, where we have basically in Chrome or Internet Explorer, I think every modern browser nowadays have the developer tools, where we can, for example, go into the console and we can see what calls happened, what was the error code, whether it was service not found or whether it was service not authorized. Different error codes that we can find, and then trying to find the root cause of that issue. And there's different tools available. We will have one dedicated session in 2021 in January that we just spent talking about authorization debugging. So we'll simulate and we'll show you in more detail what can be done, what are root causes, how do we find them. I just wanted to share the tools. So if you have any immediate need and you want to go and find, these tools might be very helpful for you. Like I said, we have 2 more sessions so far that we don't have the dates set yet, but it's going to be early in January. So stay tuned for emails. We will have 2 more sessions. One will be authorization debugging, all the ones I just mentioned, showing you how it's being done. And then one will also be specifically about our tool, how we can help you automate a lot of those manual tasks. Because today I just showed you how it's done for one application. It looks very simple, but believe it or not, if you have to authorize thousands of applications and thousands of users and thousands of rows, it's time consuming. It takes a lot of time, and that's why we have automation tools where we can upload, download through Excel and different things, check certain things, and just automate that entire, and so that you're more efficient. So we'll talk specifically about that in a dedicated session, if that's of interest for you. Other than that, again, the blogs that I posted last time already. If you want to learn more, just ask or Google. Google is a great source of knowledge. I don't know. I don't think we have any time for questions again, Jenny, unless you want to point out something. But again, we'll follow up with an email. We'll send out the recording. I'll get all the questions together from last webinar and from today's webinar. We'll have them all answered in the emails. We'll post into the email a big list of questions and answers. If there's anything in the meantime, feel free to reach out to us. We're available. Here's my email address. Just send me an email and I'll try to get back to you. Jenny, anything that is important to answer now?
Okay, I was unmuted. Sorry. Oh, we have many questions in our question box. So sorry. We have to create a follow-up email to all participants. So yeah. It's better to add it to an email and then send it to the
okay.
User.
Perfect. Yeah, for everyone.
But I have answered many questions, so you will find 2 or 3 open questions in the box. So yes, yeah.
All right, sounds good. Then thank everyone for your time. I hope you enjoyed and you had a great learning. Feel free to reach out if there's any questions. Otherwise, stay tuned for the email with the recording and all the questions. And then I hope to see you in the next webinar. And in the meantime, happy holidays and enjoy your time off if you have any. And yeah, stay safe and keep healthy. Thank you very much.
Bye.